I'm going to talk a little bit more about the value of the business analyst during different phases of the project. So we touched on that a little bit in the introduction, and there's also a more lengthy appendix that's included in your slide deck. But let's start with initiation and planning. So when you're just starting the project, it's kind of a blank sheet of paper. So during this phase, the business analyst is going to play a role that's mostly like a strategist, an architect, and they've got a very holistic view of what they're doing. So, in this phase of the project, what we want the business analyst to do is look at, how do things fit together? Are there holes in the solution? And again, kind of going off of what Becky said, what kind of organizational change management is going to be required? This is the time to start thinking of all of those things: training, org change management, requirements, the big picture solution. The analysts should be participating in the strategy. Ideally, they need to be very familiar with the organization's strategic and tactical plans. They need to understand the culture of the organization, and they need to incorporate that into building the business case and the FSR. Also, this is where the business analyst can really help by participating in the initial risk assessment. So we need to know, how risky is this project going to be when we start out? So, and then obviously it goes without saying that the business analyst is going to be a key participant in documenting current and desired states for the business process. And also, during this phase, the business analyst is going to be recommending business process improvements to the organization. Then, of course, we get into design development. So now that your project's approved, maybe you've gone through a procurement, and now you're starting the actual design, development, and implementation. And now the business analyst role changes, because now we don't have a clean sheet of paper. We have a defined project scope, and now we're bounded by that project scope in almost all instances. So now the role of the business analyst is very different, because now they've got to work very close with the business to define priorities. They've got to continue to identify gaps and risks and opportunities, because the goal now is to get to the end of the project and deliver business needs. So that doesn't mean there will never be changes. We all know that, and I'm sure there was a session somewhere along the day about that. But one of the big things is that they've got to be aware of the project scope, and they've got to continuously work with the business to understand their priorities. When we find gaps, and they're gaps that can't be addressed in the current project scope, they are key working with the business to determine, how can we work around this? How can we still be successful? How can we still meet the business needs, but without changing the scope of the project? And then the discussion about the project manager and the business analyst, very timely, because I will tell you, as a project manager myself, I also started out as a business analyst and systems analyst, and I've worked on projects now for a while that have hundreds of people on them, and there's no way I can know every person on the project, unfortunately, as much as I'd like to, but I know every business analyst on the project, because I do view the business analyst very much as an extension of myself in delivering a successful project. So I talk to, work with, meet with the business analysts every single day to talk about what issues are they uncovering, what risks are they seeing, what gaps are they finding, so that we can get ahead of it and make sure that our sponsors and our program folks are satisfied with what is delivered in the end. they're also, I didn't mention it here, but Becky's comments kind of brought it to mind. They're also key in helping set those expectations. So it's not just that they're an extension of me, and as I'm going and talking to project sponsors and external stakeholders, I'm looking at them as helping me communicate into the folks that are going to actually be boots on the ground using the solutions that we are developing. The other thing that can never start too early is prioritizing things that are going to happen after the end of the project. So most of us, I think, well, let me ask, do most of you work in the IT arena or program? IT? Okay, so actually maybe about 75%. So, you know, especially with IT projects, there's always an M&O phase. So one of the things that the business analyst helps me do from a project management perspective is when we identify those gaps and we have those workarounds, I rely on those business analysts to help identify the criticality of what needs to go in when we get into maintenance and operations. Oops, let me go back for just a second. And then the last thing I want to bring up here is that the business analyst is key in ensuring traceability. So when we say the project's done, how do we know that? We know that because we're going to do requirements traceability, and the business analyst is the person that I rely on to help ensure that the requirements that were set forth in the scope of the project that was set forth has been met, and we do that through our requirements traceability. So, you know, during this phase of it, the person truly is working as a process analyst, a systems analyst, but they're bounded by that project scope. And then we get into maintenance and operations. And I know I'm kind of cutting it short. You know, there's a lot more detailed phases of the system development life cycle and the project and the product life cycle. But here, once we get into maintenance and operations, so now we've successfully launched, in this case, an IT solution, or maybe if you're working on the program side, maybe you've successfully implemented some legislation or new regulation package. So now we're in maintenance and operations. And now we kind of go back and blend the roles. You know, now the business analyst takes on that role of that strategist and architect again, because now they're looking long-term. How do we ensure the longevity of what we've put in place? But they're also working as a process and systems analyst because we're, you know, continuously changing. There's never a situation, especially on the IT side, where we're going to implement a system and then it's going to be there. And that, you know, that holds true regardless of whether it's a custom developed solution or a COTS solution. And the same thing if you are on the program side and you're doing, you know, legislation implementation or regulation implementation, there's always cleanup that has to be done. So now it's all about continuous process improvement, and then ultimately getting down the road, as many of us are, looking at system decommission and replacement. How many of you in your departments or organizations have a decommissioning project on the horizon or replacement? Oh wow, I'm surprised so few. Maybe you're just not admitting it.
We're not ready to let go.
Yeah. So you know, when you do get to that phase of the product life cycle, where you have to consider, where you're no longer in a position that you can continue to improve upon what you have, and you really have to look at decommissioning and or replacement, your business analyst again is going to be key. And it's really going to be going back to now that clean sheet of paper. So now we've come full circle, and now we're looking at what are the possible opportunities, what are the possible strategies that we can use to come up with a new solution to replace our aging COBOL or natural or fill in the blank kind of system. So it's an important role, and I think it's something that for those of you who are already playing this role, you know it's an exciting role because you get to do something different every day. And as you can see, we've just touched on the surface, but the role of the business analyst is not something that you just do one thing and that's what you do every single day. You play different roles depending on the project you're on, the maintenance and operation effort you're on, the legislation that you're working on. Whatever it is, you're playing different roles at different phases of that life cycle, whether it's a system development life cycle or a product life cycle or a life cycle of a project, of a program project.